Hello, my name is Euro and welcome to another Baldur's Gate 3 build video. In today's video I'll be showing you my Vengeance of Avernus paladin, which will be a paladin sorcerer multiclass that will focus around dealing heavy melee damage with also infused flaming attacks, while also being able to cast fireballs for a bonus action. Now for the character creation with this character, I think the most fitting race would be any tiefling you can choose of your preference. Of course it will work with any other one as well, but if we're going for the so to say thematics, I think tieflings fit here quite the best since our whole shtick is Avernus, right? So as a tiefling, we get the standard racial speed, we also get dark vision of 40 feet, which is nice, and we also have the hellish resistance, which makes us take half damage from fire, which is going to be quite useful, as we're going to be doing a lot of fire damage all around. Now for the subrace, I've chosen a Zariel tiefling, mainly because Thaumaturgy is nice as a cantrip, since it can help you in dialogue with giving advantage on intimidation and performance checks, but also the Zariel tieflings get two smites, one of them being the Searing Smite, which deals fire damage, and then there's also a Burning Smite. You unlock both of these at level 3 and 5. And then for our class, of course, we're gonna go as a Paladin, which gives us the Lay on Hands as a healing, and then Divine Sense, which gives us for 2 turns bonus advantage against Celestials, Fiends, and Undead on attack rolls. Now for our subclass, I think Oath of Vengeance is gonna be perfect, as of course we are the Vengeance of Avernus. This is going to give us Inquisitor's Might, which you or an ally weapons attacks deal additional 3 radiant damage and can daze enemies for 1 turn. This damage is scaling with your charisma modifier, but later on as we level up we'll get a much better one, namely the Vow of Enmity, which we can use on ourselves to gain advantage for 10 turns for free basically. And then our Oath of Tenants, which basically this is just the sort of guidelines on how to not break our oath. These are all different for all of the other oaths. Now for the ability scores, we're going to go with 17 strength, 10 dexterity, 14 constitution, and 16 charisma. 10 strength we want, of course, this is going to be our main damage modifier, and it's going to help us with mobility since we'll be able to jump further. Then 10 dexterity is nil heal, so we don't have negative initiative. You could take this out and put it into wisdom instead, but since we are a paladin, we should have proficiency in wisdom saving throws, so there we go, as we do. So I will just put it back into dexterity. Constitution 14, we are not gonna be really focusing, or the build will not be revolving around focusing on concentrating on spells, although we'll be concentrating on some spells, but that's the reason why we don't actually necessarily need to have 16 constitution, so that is why we instead have 16 charisma. This is going to help us with our aura of protection, and with a little bit of a higher spell save DC, so it's a little bit harder for enemies to save against the fireball, so they take full damage, but regardless, any damage from a fireball is useful. Now for the background, I'm going with the Guild Artisan. That is just my favorite background to pick. This background gives us persuasion and insight proficiency, which is quite handy. And then for the skills available here, all of these are pretty bad, especially medicine and religion, so I would leave it as where they are. So athletics and intimidation. Intimidation, of course, can help us with dialogue, especially now since we have thaumaturgy and we can get advantage on intimidation. Alright, so at level 2 we unlock our paladin spellcasting, our divine smites, and of course the fighting style. Here we're gonna go with the great weapon fighting. What this does is when we roll a 1 or 200 damage die for an attack with a 200 melee weapon, that die is rerolled once. So this is supposed to prevent you in a nutshell on an average to not deal minimum damage, well, to make it more rare basically. So it is a quite nice fighting style. For the spells, I was just taking all of the various flavors of Divine Smites, since Searing Smite is going to be useful against creatures that are weak to fire. Thunderous Smite is nice since it pushes enemies back and makes them prone, so you can get advantage against them. And then Wrathful Smite is nice since you can frighten targets with it, and then frighten targets they can't move, and they have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, which is quite useful. Then for the other two spells list here, since we do have 16 charisma, we can get away with using something like Compel Duel and Command. That I would suggest for the early game taking heroism. This can make you immune to being frightened, which is quite powerful. And then also Protection from Evil and Good is useful as well, since it makes you immune to being charmed, frightened, and possessed. And creatures that are aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, and undead, they have disadvantage on attack rolls against you. But for right now, we could take also something like Divine Favor for 3 turns with deal additional radiant damage. But then again, you might as well just use Divine Smites instead. So let's just take Compel Duel for now. At level 3, we gain the Divine Health. This basically makes us immune to becoming diseased. We also unlock 2 subclass features or actions, one of them being Abjure Enemy. Frightened enemy, they'll have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and they cannot move. Fiends and Undead have disadvantage on the saving throw. And if the target saves, they're slowed instead. So this has essentially effect regardless if the enemy saves or not, which can be powerful since you do frighten them for 3 turns and they can't move, or slow them for 3 turns. But the second action here is much more powerful, especially because I think it's bugged, since you gain advantage on attack rolls against enemies. So you're supposed to use this on a enemy to gain advantage against them, but the game allows you to use this on yourself, and when you use this on yourself, you gain advantage against everybody for 10 turns, which is very powerful. We also unlock 2 oath spells, which one of them is Bane and Hunter's Mark. Now, Bane is not really necessary since there is plenty of equipment in the game that actually inflicts Bane, so it's a quite common status effect that you can inflict on enemies, especially with, for example, Harold to the crossbow. But Hunter's Mark can be nice for using on enemies and dealing additional damage. We will have quite a lot of spell slots with this character. We'll have up to 5th level spell slots because of our sorcerer subclass, though we'll primarily want to either convert them into sorcery points or use them for our divine smites. Then for our race, we unlock our first out of the 2 racial smites, first being the Searing Smite. So this is basically the same as the normal Searing Smite. It's, I believe, only upcasted to level 2, since this is a 2d6 fire damage, while the standard level 1 one is 1d6. So it's a little bit better than just the level 1 one, so that's quite nice. Then for the spells, we unlocked an additional spell slot. Here I would suggest taking the Protection from Evil and Good. This can be useful throughout the entire game pretty much, because very common enemies you'll fight will be undead, aberrations, and fiends in some case. But most common ones are, I believe, undead. At level 4, we get an upgraded Lay on Hands charge, so we heal now more HP. Then for prepared spells, I'm going to leave Command here. Command is quite nice, but again, you can go with any one of these. Probably not Cure Wounds, as it takes an action and it's only a 1d8 plus 3, while you can just drink a healing potion or greater healing potion to get a more powerful effect, saving you a spell slot. So there's that. Now for first feat, we're going to take Ability Improvement plus 2 into Strength, so we get it to 19. Now, either at this point or at level 5, you can deal with Anti-Death to get a plus 1 into any of the ability points. And there I would suggest taking it to Strength, so you get it to a nice 20, which is going to boost you even further. We will be increasing our Strength later on as well, because there is in Act 2 the Potion of Everlasting Vigor you can get from the Blood Merchant. And also the Mirror of Loss, so then we're going to get around 24, or the top Strength we can get with this character will be 24, which is going to make us quite powerful in combat. At level 5, we unlock our extra attack, and we also unlock 2nd level spells for our paladin. Now, the old spells, we gain Hold Person and Misty Step. Misty Step is amazing, so this is another quite good feature of the Auto Vengeance paladins. You get them regardless. And then Hold Person is also quite powerful, of course, as if an enemy fails a saving throw, you hold them, and then any attacks within 10 feet are always critical, which is pretty good. And then we unlock our 2nd racial spell, which is the Branding Smite. So possibly marks the target with light, preventing it from going invisible. It deals 2d6 radiant damage. So this, as a level 2 spell, is a little bit weaker, since a normal Divine Smite deals 1d8 damage, but level 2 deals 2d8 damage. So, but this has the benefit of preventing enemies from going invisible as they save. Now for our spells, here, nothing really is too important other than potentially getting the Branding Smite. So you have this one on demand on top of the one from your racial spells. So this is, we'll be getting one more paladin level, so then you'll have a few choices on what to choose spells wise. So at level 6, we get our Aura Protection, and this will be our last paladin level. We want this because you and any allies nearby gain a plus 0 bonus to your saving throws. This is going to be a plus 3 because this scales with the charisma modifier. So in our case, it's going to be a plus 3. And then for the spells that we get here, you can take anything you may prefer. Protection from poison you could take, since we'll have a lot of spell slots. You can use this so that you have advantage against saving throws and being poisoned and have resistance to poison damage. Although Oh, that's disease, right? It's not poison. Right. So this can be also useful, especially against, for example, the Fey enemies who like dealing damage, poison damage. So you could take that. You could also take lesser restoration to help your allies against, especially paralysis or blindness. So those both can be useful. So I'll just take lesser restoration for now. Alright, so at level 7 we're gonna start our multi-class and we're gonna go into a sorcerer. Sorcerers and paladins have great synergy because both of them use charisma as a spellcasting modifier, so our spellcasting accuracy with cantrips and spells that require attack rolls will not be too terrible. Then for our cantrips, since at level 7 you would still be in Act 2, my suggestion would be you can take Light. This can help you against various enemies there. Then for the second cantrip we can take is the Friends. This can give you advantage against on charisma checks against a non-hostile creature, so this is very useful in dialogues. We do have Thaumaturgy, but the difference between Thaumaturgy and this is Thaumaturgy you cast on yourself and it works only with performance and intimidation, and it doesn't it's not treated as a crime since you don't use this on the person you're talking to. Friends use this on a person you are talking to, and then if this timer runs out or you stop concentrating there, you make sure that you leave the area before that happens, otherwise they will accuse you of enchanting them and then you have trouble with the guards. Then for the other cantrips, we're going to take the Firebolt since we're focusing on fire and Firebolt, so Firebolt makes sense here. You could take any other damaging cantrip if you prefer one. And then for the last one, we're going to take Blade Ward. Now, Blade Ward generally I wouldn't suggest using, as getting 2 turns of resistance to bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing isn't really worth it to use up an action, since you can use, in this case as well, now extra attack instead. But since we'll be a sorcerer and we'll be getting Quicken Spell at some point, we can use Quicken Spell to cast Blade Ward or as a bonus action if we are in a pickle where enemies are focusing us down and dealing a lot of damage to us. Then for our 2 spells, we're going to be taking the Shield. Shield is quite powerful because as a reaction, when you're about to be hit by an enemy, increase your armor class by 5 and you take no damage from magic missiles. So this is a pretty powerful spell even as a level 1/1. Then for the second spell, we're going to take Magic Missile. This can help us finish off low health enemies so that we just don't have to worry about missing them in combat. Although, since we are Auto Vengeance Paladin, we can also just... we'll have a high attack, not attack, but high accuracy regardless, but still, sometimes you might be out of your Channel Oath charge, so you can't use your Auto Vengeance. So regardless, this is a very useful spell for finishing off enemies who have like 1 to 6 HP left, since this can deal minimum of 2 damage and then maximum of guaranteed 6, and then of course it can go up to 15 depending on the dice roll. For the subclass, we're going to go with the Draconic Bloodline. This is going to give us extra HP per sorcerer level, so total it's going to be of 6. We also get the Draconic Resilience, which won't matter to us since this only works if you're not wearing armor. This essentially gives you the permanent mage armor effect. For the Dragon Ancestor, you could go with any one of these, up to preference which one of these spells you get. I went with the Draconic Ancestry Gold, which gives me the Disguise Self. This is useful in the Mirror of Loss area, where you can use Disguise Self with a bunch of other, with the ring and some other things to gain benefits to more easily pass that skill check. Then for the Bloodline, we're just gonna go with no scales. This is up to you again. If you want scales, you can just get them. At level 8, we are a sorcerer level 2. We unlock our meta magic, so we can use create sorcery points or create spell slots with sorcery points. For the spell here, if you're going to go stick to the theme, you can go with the Burning Hands, or you could take something like Thunderwave to push enemies away, which is also quite handy. Or even something like Hand Sleep, so you can jump further, especially if you use it outside of combat first, since if you use it outside of combat, it's a ritual spell and it doesn't cost a spell slot. Now, for meta magic, out of these, we really don't exactly rely on any of these. We could take Careful Casting, so if we use a Fireball on our allies, we can make sure that they save, so they take half damage guaranteed. We could also use Wind Spell, although we won't really have any spells that we're going to be using them as. Extended Spell is nice for the increased duration, and Distance Spell is nice for increasing the range of these spells. So, out of all of these, you could go with any one, as the main one we'll be using is when we get it is the Quicken Spell. So for this case, I'll just take the Distance Spell. At level 9, we unlock our second level spells for the Sorcerer. And here, I'm going to suggest that you could take the Scorching Rays, although I think you're better off just using second level spells for your smites. Instead, take something like the mirror image, or where is it? So the sorcerer does not get blurs. Oh, they do. Never mind, I'm blind. Either mirror image or blur. You will be able to cast this as a bonus action, I believe, right now. Yes. So we have quick and spell here. Spells that cost an action cost a bonus action instead. This will cost you 3 sorcery points per spell. So this is going to be very useful, very powerful, since then you can cast either 2 spells during combat. So you can cast blur and mirror image on yourself to be exceptionally tanky, or you can use your 2 divine smites with extra attack and then cast a bonus action to chuck a fireball later on. So for now I will take the mirror image. At level 10, we unlock an additional cantrip, and here you can go with any way you may prefer. You could take Mage Hand and the Minor Illusion for utility outside of combat. You could take also like something Shocking Grasp, which can prevent enemies from gaining reaction attacks on you. But I'll be taking Bone Chill instead, and this is a pretty useful one against enemies that will like to heal during combat. So this can prevent them, and Bone Chill effects does prevent enemies from healing. Now for a second level spell here, we're gonna take the blur, like mentioned before. You could also take darkness, since with our equipment we will be immune to its effects, but it's not really necessary, since so if you really want to play with darkness, there are arrows of darkness which you can work with as well. So we're gonna go with blur. Now for our second feat, this is our second and last feat, we're gonna go with the Great Weapon Master. What this is going to do, it's going to allow us to gain 10 additional damage if we are using a two-handed melee weapon we are proficient with. So 10 extra damage, but a cost of 5 attack roll. Now this won't matter to us, since we do have Vow of Enmity, who's going to give us a guaranteed advantage against enemies for 10 turns. We are essentially going to nullify this attack roll penalty, which, well, the damage boost from this is going to be quite powerful. And then if we kill an enemy or gain a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, we gain another melee weapon attack as a bonus action on that turn, so we can potentially strike 3 times with our weapon. At level 11, we unlock our 3rd level spells, and here we're of course going to go take the Fireball. Fireball is going to be quite nice with this build, since we'll be able to cast it again as a bonus action. And finally, at level 12, we unlock our Elemental Affinity Resistance, so we can get resistance to associated with our draconic ancestry, although we won't really need it. We can turn this as a reaction off, since we are tiefling, we already have resistance to fire. So if you went with any other draconic ancestry like poison, cold, or similar, you then can use this to gain resistance against that damage type. And then of course here we have elemental affinity damage. When you cast a spell that deals damage of the type associated with your draconic ancestry, you add your charisma modifier damage dealt. So this should add our charisma modifier to our fireball damage. And then for the last spell here, you can have quite a few choices. You could take something like the, where is it? Grand Flight, so you can give yourself life if you wish to. You could also use some of the more offensive ones like Hypnotic Pattern or the Fear, which are both quite handy. You could also take something like Blindness, but what I would like to go for is Enlarge, Reduce. What we can do this is we cast this on ourselves, and then we give ourselves basically 1d4 bonus damage and all of the benefits that will go for that. So make a creature large or small that to affect their weapon and damage and strength check and saving throws. So if we enlarge ourselves, we gain 1d4 bonus damage and we gain advantage on strength checks and saving throws. But if we reduce ourselves, we gain disadvantage and penalty on damage. So you would want to use this mainly to boost your damage. So this can be quite handy. Alright, so that is it for the levels. I will now see you in the equipment section. Alright, so here we are in the equipment section. So let's start with our headgear. Here we have, of course, the Helldusk Helmet. You can see in magical and ordinary darkness up to a range of 40 feet. You also cannot be blinded. The wielder has a +2 bonus to saving throws. We can't be hit by a critical hit. And we also get the Immolating Gaze. See and frighten a target with nothing but your glower. You deal additional 2 to 16 fire damage against burning creatures. So this, if a target is burning, this deals additional damage and of course can potentially frighten them. This is a wisdom save, so there is that. Quite nice helmet overall. Then for the early game alternatives, you could take the Flawed Helldusk Helmet. The wielder gains a +2 bonus to saving throws against spells. So essentially the same effect like the Helldusk Helmet, except Helldusk Helmet gets a bunch of other effects on top of that. For the cloak, we're going with the Cinder Moth Cloak. A creature that damages the wearer within 7 feet receives burning. So then they will take 1d4 fire damage if they fail to save. We could also, for the alternatives, take the Cloak Protection for extra armor class and saving throws, although we already have quite armor, so probably won't need that. And then we could also take the Cloak of Displacement, which gives us the effects of Blur, so then we wouldn't need to use our spell slots for Blur since we'll have Blur in our Cloak. But if you go with the Cindermoth Cloak like me, then thin casting Blur and Mirror Image can be quite nice. For the armor, we're going with the Helldusk Armor. You're proficient with the armor while wearing it. When you succeed a saving throw, the caster receives burning for 3 turns. So this is against saving throws on spells or any other really saving throw. Then the target that caused you to do the saving throw, they will receive burning for 1d4 damage for 3 turns, which is, this can synergize of course with, if the target is burning, Emulating Gaze can deal extra damage against them. So this is quite nice. And then we also gain resistance to fire damage, and we cannot be burned, so we can walk through fire freely. And we also take 3 less damage from all sources. So what this means is, well, we would normally, if we didn't have the effect of can't be burned, we would take 0 damage from fire regardless. Now, since our weapon will be actually giving us heat, we'll be also taking 0 damage from heat because burning deals 1d4, so 4 maximum, and we reduce this by 3, but because we're resistant, we half it, so maximum it would do is 2, but again, because we take 3 less from all sources, it's 0, so this is quite handy. Then for the early game alternative, you could take the Flawed Helldusk Armor. When you are hit by a foe within 7 feet, it might take 1d4 fire damage. So again, similar effect to the actual Helldusk Armor, but again, a little bit weaker. And this armor gives you take 1 less piercing damage. For the gloves, we're going with the Helldusk Gloves. You gain +1 to spell save DC and attack rolls. We also deal additional 1d6 fire damage with our weapon attacks. And we can possibly... bleeding is actually for unarmed damage, so never mind that. You won't be getting that. Instead, we gain the Rays of Fire. So this is essentially Scorching Rays, but I believe a little bit more powerful, since this is a 9 to 54 instead of 6 to 36. So this is a quite nice fire damage dealing spell, especially if you make enemies, if they are not resistant to it. For the alternatives, you can go with the Flawed Helldusk Gloves. Your weapon attacks deal additional 1d4 fire damage, and then again, same thing, but just weaker. If you're doing unarmed attacks, then you can potentially inflict bleeding and deal 1d4 necrotic damage. So if you notice, well, all of the Helldusk armor pieces are essentially upgrades of the Flawed Helldusk, which makes sense. Now, there are no Flawed Helldusk boots, but there are Helldusk boots, the actual ones, the non-flawed ones, right? So while wearing these boots, you cannot be forcibly moved by a foe's spell or action, and you ignore the effects of difficult terrain. So a very powerful effect right there. We actually get the Infernal Evasion. When you fail a saving throw, you may use a reaction to succeed instead. So there's just like basically on a reverse card. I fail, but not really. Even though that's not really good analogy, but anyway. We also get the Hell Crawl. Teleport to an area, deal 2d8 fire damage where you land, and the impact blast spreads in a 10-feet zone. So this is essentially a Misty Step, but with a little bit of a Hellfire spice. For the alternatives, we can take, of course, Disintegrated Nightwalkers. You can be enwebbed, entangled, or snared, can slip on grease or ice, and we gain a Misty Step once per short rest. Then we could also use the Boots of Elemental Momentum. Whenever we deal cold, mainly fire damage, with a spell or a cantrip, we gain momentum for 2 turns. So this effect can be activated by the use of your Searing Smite. So if you use Searing Smite, you can get momentum with these boots. Then for our amulet, we're going with the Face Semblance Amulet. You have advantage on Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma saving throws. This is going to help us to resist primarily, for example, the Illithid type of saving throws, and of course, Hold Person, Hold Monster, and similar. For the alternative, you could take the Amulet of Harpers. Advantage on Wisdom saving throw checks and a shield as a reaction once per long rest. Basically, the Face Semblance Amulet is just essentially an upgrade to the Amulet of the Harpers, although Face Semblance Amulet loses the shield, but we already have shield anyway since we are sorcerer. For the rings, now this character doesn't really have any rings that will greatly synergize. What I've been using was the Ring of Protection and the Crusher's Ring for extra movement speed. You could use Strange Conduit Ring if you are focusing on spells, since we'll be concentrating potentially on Blur or the Enlarge, we can then give ourselves additional 1d4 psychic damage. You could also use the Ring of Elemental Infusion. When you use a Searing Smite, this ring will activate and it will give you an additional 1d4 fire damage because of it, which is pretty good. And then lastly, we have the Killer's Sweetheart here. This ring is going to be very useful if you bank up that one critical hit, and then when you want to use it, you use that critical hit, and then you cast a 5th level Divine Smite as a reaction for additional 5d8 radiant damage, which is quite nice. Then for our weapons, we have the Hellfire Great Axe here. So this is a 1d12 plus 1d6 fire damage dealing weapon. We also, whenever we deal damage with this weapon, we gain 2 turns of hit, so we can get additional fire damage from this weapon just by using it, which is additional 1 fire damage per hit stack. So consume your hit to fuel a powerful attack. Next time you deal fire damage, you deal additional 1 fire damage for every turns of hits remaining. I believe the maximum stacks is 7, so you can deal a total of bonus 7 damage. This weapon also gets a very powerful cleave attack, which is the Hellflame Cleave. You deal 24 to 55 damage, so your weapon damage, and then 1d6 from the weapon, 1d6 from the gloves, and then 2d6 additionally. We also inflict rolling hellfire on the ground, which is a 66. From what I realized is this rolling hellfire will immediately deal damage to enemies. So this is actually 30 plus 36, so it's actually way higher on the damage. You can sometimes one-shot a lot of the enemies if they roll poorly on both checks, so both on this damage and this damage as well. Because I did notice it deals a lot more damage than just 24 to 55, so yeah, there's that. So this is a quad powerful cleave attack in a cone in front of you, a very powerful weapon. For the early game alternatives, I was using basically the Armor Blade throughout the entire game, especially if you combine it with the Drake Throat Glaive, which can enchant it with +1, so it deals damage against enemies who potentially might be immune to damage unless the weapon is enchanted. So this can be a good weapon if you do use various buffs on it. Or you could also use the Thermodynamo Axe. When you deal damage with this weapon, you can turn to 2 turns of hit, so you can also generate heat with this weapon. For our rage weapon, we're going with the Hell Rider Longbow. Namely, we are using this as a stat stick so that we gain +3 bonus to initiative, and we also gain advantage on perception ability checks. Now, the Fiendish Fire will not really work for us since we won't be primarily attacking it a lot, but it's a nice effect and it can possibly inflict Fairy Fire on the target once per turn. For the alternatives, we can use the Bow of Avernus for extra initiative, or we can use Hunting Shortbow and Gandril's Aspiration for the advantage against monstrosity type enemies, and then Hunting Shortbow gives you Hunter's Mark once per long rest, and then Gandril's Aspiration is nice against the undead, since you can use Sacred Munitions to turn them. Now, the last 2 pieces I would like to mention, so the 2 elixirs I've been using was the Elixir of Vigilance, so we get even more initiative, and also Elixir of Peerless Focus. This can help you basically save a lot more often with your blur and enlarge spells, just in case if you're using them to increase your damage throughout the fight. Alright, so that is it for the equipment section. I will now see you in the combat showcase. Alright, so here are the Flaming Fists barracks for yet another battle showcase. So before combat started, I did drink an Elixir of Vigilance for extra initiative. I also used Valve of Enmity so I get advantage on my attacks. And I did also use Mirror Image and the Enlarge on myself for extra damage. So now, let's take a look at this Hellflame Cleave. What's the damage like with it? And let's take a look. So if we take a look at, for example, Fist Colts, we dealt slashing damage, which from our 1d12 plus the rerolls, and then from the Enlarge 1d4. And we also dealt our Charisma modifiers to it somehow, instead of, for example, the Great Weapon Fighting or Great Weapon Master. Then, of course, the additional 2d6 and 1d6 fire damage from it. But then if you scroll down, if you take a look at Fist Colts, he also took the 66. So you deal the initial damage to them from the actual cleave, and they immediately take the burning damage, which is quite ridiculous. So now they took, all of them are, this one is around what? That's like 25-30% HP. He's at 40% HP, and he's also around 40%. So damage is quite crazy. Now, normally, of course, you would need to drink a potion of speed, but since for the sake of the showcase, I won't be using meta magic, but you can use meta magic to cast a fireball. You can also use spell scrolls. For example, I have a bunch of fireball spell scrolls to use those as well. But we can also just instead use our potion of speed. And let's do an attack. So let's take a Divine Smite level 5. It is on this side. It will be quite an overkill, but if you take a look, we have 96 accuracy because of the Vow of Enmity with the Great Weapon Master all in active. So the damage will be quite high, especially if you crit. And we managed to actually crit, which is perfect. One suggestion though, in generally with all paladins, when you are using divine smites, I made a mistake here. I didn't basically divine smite on critical, ask, then divine smite on critical. Always have them on ask, because if you, for example, have it on ask on level 1 and level 2, if you run out of those spell slots and then you have only the ones that are not on ask, the game will automatically use those higher ones. So generally it's a good idea to have all of them on ask. So I was a little bit called slack in there, but it's fine. So yeah, as you can see here, I turned the elemental affinity resistance off since I already have fire damage and we're focusing on fire damage. But if you went for some other one, other element, you could have it on. But again, it's worth it to have the dragon elemental affinity on, because then you deal extra damage with your fireball, and apparently the health flame cleave as well. Let's then do a normal attack with 2 extra fire damage from the heat convergence, just so we finish this one off, hopefully. Alright, there you go. And now let's take a look at his damage, because his damage is normal since the first one was a crit. So we dealt 35 slashing damage. That was a 1d12. We rolled a maximum damage on the actual axe. We got a 9 from our strength modifier and the weapon enchantment, 1d4 from the enlarge. We rolled the maximum on the enlarge. So we actually rolled the basically maximum damage possible from our melee weapon, which is quite nice. And then we got 11 from the 1d6 great Hellfire Great Axe, 6 from the Infernal Touch, and then +2 attacker has 2 turns of heat. So we dealt 11 fire damage there as well. So yeah, a very powerful character, heavy damage dealer, and quite possibly the, well, great character for the main phase of the party, so to say. Alright, so that is it for the build. I hope you enjoyed. I would appreciate if you leave the like and subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 content, and I'll see you in the next one.